Hi everyone, my name is Grace, and together with Caleb, Rishab, Chloe, and Rohan, we will be presenting Indonesia in Focus, Political Economy, Development, and Trade Policy.
Hello everyone, today we want to take you on a journey across the sea to Indonesia, the world's fourth most populous country, and show how globalization has created unprecedented opportunities for Australian business. We will explore the systems, changes, and challenges that define the diamond market. Imagine you are an Australian business leader looking north across the sea toward Indonesia. What you are seeing isn't just another country. You are looking at the fourth largest population in the world, waving at you with unprecedented opportunities. This massive market is undergoing fundamental changes that are opening doors for Australian business like never before. Indonesia uses a civil law system based on written codes. Culturally, they value group harmony and a long-term relationship over individual wins. Unlike Australia's more individualistic approach, their economy is a mix of state-owned companies and private business, guided by principles that balance free markets with social fairness. Now, here is the exciting part. Indonesia has changed dramatically. According to the World Bank data analysis by Verica and Pengasu, in the 1990s, their trade tariffs were high, around 50%. By 2018, they dropped to just 2%, with most favored nation tariffs at 6%, making it easier for foreign business to enter. Indonesia is also a key player in global supply chain, especially in oil. And they are now the world's sixth largest footwear exporter, earning billions. Its success has created a positive feedback loop, promoting further policy reforms like Law No. 25 of 2007, which relaxed foreign direct investment rules even more. Indonesia's political system is a democracy, with a focus on the rule of law and people's sovereignty. Their economy blends government involvement with market freedom, and it's working. This isn't just a theory. Globalization has driven concrete changes. Indonesia has opened the market through trade liberalization and ASEAN agreement, delivering proven results. The strong growth performance from 1986 to 1997 following deregulation demonstrates this approach works. Today, simplified licensing procedures have led to rising foreign capital inflows, and the recent Law No. 65 of 2024 represents a significant regulatory shift, aligning Indonesia's intellectual property landscape with international frameworks and expanding the scope of patentable inventions to global standards. But there are differences to navigate. In Australia, they rely on common law and value individual success. In Indonesia, it's about written rules and collective harmony. Their economy mix states control with market, unlike free market system. These aren't barriers. They are just the differences, ways of doing business you need to understand. A real-world example shows why caution is a key. As documented by Le Monec in 2017, in the church mining case, the company faced a major setback when their license in Indonesia was revoked due to fraud. They took the case to international arbitration but lost, paying hefty fees. It highlights how license instability, whether from corruption, policy changes, or administrative flaws, represents a major threat because license can be revoked, creating significant legal uncertainty. The ruling emphasized that strict due diligence on local partners and licensing is crucial, and that relying solely on written documents is far from adequate, perhaps most sobering. Even international arbitration through ICSID cannot provide absolute protection if domestic laws determine that the investment behavior is illegal. So, how do you succeed? Building strong local partnership and take time to understand the Indonesia culture. Do detailed due diligence, not just on finance, but on legal and regulatory matters. Focus on long-term relationship, as trust as harmony matter deeply. State updates on policy changes that commit to the long harm rather than chasing quick profits.
Hello, my name is Rishabh, and I'll be providing you with a brief on the concepts of economic development and human development and how these measures are relevant, and will conclude by recommending which measure is of greater importance while establishing presence in Indonesia. Economic development refers to the process of enhancing the well-being and quality of life. Economic development can be achieved through job creation and investment in human capital such as healthcare industries, education systems, and infrastructure. Economists can measure economic development using indicators such as GDP, GDP per capita, GNI, GNI per capita, and unemployment rate. According to the World Bank 2023, Indonesia is classified as an upper middle income economy with an approximate GNI per capita of 4,901 US dollars in 2024, which is an increase compared to 2022, where they had a GNI per capita of US dollars 3,850. This means that the average income per person has increased by 1,051 US dollars and can be reflected by an increase in GDP, as residents of Indonesia can now spend a larger proportion of their income on necessities such as food, healthcare, housing, education, etc. The Indonesian economy is considered Southeast Asia's largest developing economy, having grown a total of 24% over the past decade. In terms of economic structure, the Indonesian economy went through a structural transition from relying on its primary sector in the 1970s to the secondary and tertiary sectors at present, with the tertiary sector contributing to over 40% of its current GDP, according to Statista 2023. The GDP per capita has also grown from 3,854 US dollars in 2020 to 4,925 US dollars at present. This signifies that the living conditions in Indonesia are improving. A rise in GDP per capita means that the economy is now capable of producing more output per person, which means that the productive efficiency throughout the economy is increasing. A rise in GDP per capita also means that the government is collecting more tax revenue through PPN, which is essentially the Indonesian VAT, and can reinvest that incremental revenue into other industries such as healthcare, education, and social welfare, all contributing towards the country's economic development. As for human development, this concept focuses on aspects such as health, education, standards of living, and infrastructure, and is commonly measured by calculating the country's Human Development Index. According to the World Bank 2023, Indonesia had an HDI of 0.712 for the year 2020, which has now risen to 0.72 for the year 2023, according to the UNDP 2024. This results in an increase in human development over the past 3 years, as it shows an increase in the quality of healthcare facilities, which can be further proven by Indonesia's increase in life expectancy from 69 to 71 years over the same time period. Moreover, according to macro trends, Indonesia's unemployment rates have also fallen from 7% to 4.91% from 2020 to 2024, which tells us that more people have access to healthcare and education systems, improving Indonesia's standard of living and attracting more investment towards these industries, leading to higher rates of literacy across the country and acting as factors that boost the country's HDI. To conclude, if an Australian firm were to establish presence in Indonesia, it should focus on human development. Although economic development and its components are key in determining economic performance, stability alongside market research, it does not account for factors such as labor productivity, healthiness of the labor force, skill level, and education level of the workforce. Poor education systems may influence a lack of skills and efficiency in the labor force, resulting in inadequate employee performance and potential sacrifices in the quality and quantity of the output produced. Substandard health care systems might also result in absenteeism due to workers suffering from poor health conditions and may cause a rise in labor turnover. Lastly, if the standard of living in Indonesia is low, workers may lack motivation and will have low work morale, further making them inefficient and a hindrance to the firm. These are crucial factors that need to be taken into account, such as because indices such as GDP and GNI and other economic development related measurement tools are often undermined. Hence, we believe measures of human development are indispensable when considering to establish their presence in Indonesia.
In this section, I'll be assessing the cultural distance between Indonesia and Australia using three key frameworks: Hofstede's 6 cultural dimensions, Ronan and Schenker's cultural clusters, and Hall's high and low context communication. I'll then critically evaluate whether these cultures are moving closer together or becoming more different over time. Let's begin with Hofstede's 6 dimensions, which provide a useful numerical comparison. The first dimension is power distance. Indonesia scores very high at 78, meaning that hierarchy and authority are deeply respected. Employees expect clear direction from their superiors, and titles like Pak and Bu, which translates to Sir or Mr., and Ma'am or Miss, are used as signs of respect. In contrast, Australia scores 36, showing a preference for egalitarianism and informality. Subordinates are usually consulted in decision making. The implication is a large distance. Australians may see Indonesian workplaces as too hierarchical, while Indonesians may see Australians as lacking respect for authority. Next is individualism versus collectivism. Indonesia scores just 14, showing it is strongly collectivist. People define themselves through group membership and prioritize family and community obligations. Australia, on the other hand, scores 90, one of the highest in the world, reflecting strong individualism. This makes it the sharpest divide between the two countries. On masculinity versus femininity, Indonesia scores 46, which suggests a more feminine orientation where harmony and cooperation are important. Australia scores 61, leaning more masculine with an emphasis on competition and achievement. The distance here is moderate. Both value success, but in different ways. For uncertainty avoidance, Indonesia scores 48 and Australia 51. Both are moderate, showing relative comfort with ambiguity. This is their closest dimension. Looking at long-term orientation, Indonesia scores 62, meaning it is pragmatic, future-focused, and values perseverance. Australia scores 31, showing a short-term orientation with preference for quick outcomes. This creates another large gap. Finally, indulgence versus restraint. Indonesia scores 38, reflecting restraint, modesty, and the influence of social norms. Australia at 71 is indulgent, with a culture that embraces leisure and self-expression. Again, the distance here is large. So overall, Hofstede shows strong cultural distance in 4 of the 6 dimensions, especially in individualism, power distance, long-term orientation, and indulgence. Now let's look at the second framework, Ronan and Schenker's cultural clusters. This model groups countries into clusters of cultural similarity. Indonesia belongs to the Asian cluster, which is characterized by collectivism, high power distance, and relational trust. Decision-making tends to be consensus-based, and authority is respected. Business is often built on personal networks and relationships. Australia, however, is part of the Anglo cluster. This includes countries like the UK, the US, and New Zealand. Anglo clusters are marked by individualism, egalitarianism, direct communication, and a task-oriented approach. Business in this context focuses on efficiency, initiative, and performance. The implication of being in different clusters is clear. Their values and behaviors are physically distant. Australian managers may find Indonesian communication indirect or overly differential, while Indonesians may perceive Australians as blunt, informal, or not respectful of hierarchy. The third framework is Edward Hall's model of high versus low context communication, which is very useful for comparing Indonesia and Australia. Indonesia is a high context culture. That means people rely heavily on nonverbal cues, shared understanding, and relationships to communicate. For example, silence can signal disagreement, and avoiding direct confrontation helps maintain harmony. Australia, on the other hand, is a low context culture. Here, communication is explicit and direct, with people valuing clarity and open discussion. Research by Warner Soderholm in 2013 confirms that context levels strongly influence how managers interpret messages. This helps us understand why Australians may mistake Indonesian silence as agreement, while Indonesians may see Australians' bluntness as insensitive. Finally, let's consider whether Indonesia and Australia are becoming more similar or more different. There is some evidence of convergence, particularly in Indonesian cities like Jakarta. Urban youth are heavily influenced by global media, social platforms, overseas education, and the presence of multinational companies. They often display more individualism and merit based attitudes, which resemble Anglo cultural traits. However, strong evidence of divergence remains. Indonesia's core cultural values, collectivism, respect for hierarchy, and religious traditions are deeply embedded and reinforced through cultural practices and even government policies. For example, family obligations and community rituals remain central in everyday life. So, to sum up, Indonesia and Australia are becoming more similar in urban and professional context, but overall, they remain culturally disparate. For Australian firms, this means acknowledging and adapting to Indonesia's enduring collectivist and hierarchical values, while also recognizing opportunities to connect with globally influenced younger generations.
I'll be talking about how Indonesia's industries can be examined through the trade theories of Adam Smith and David Ricardo, and which approach might best guide Indonesia's economic development. First, let's start with Adam Smith's theory of absolute advantage. Smith argued that countries should specialize in producing goods where they are the most efficient compared to others. If we apply this to Indonesia, the evidence is quite clear. Indonesia is the world's largest producer of palm oil, and it also has abundant fertile land that allows it to be a major exporter of rubber, cocoa, and coffee. Beyond agriculture, Indonesia is also a leading exporter of coal, and with its vast maritime territory, it has significant strength in fisheries and seafood exports. These industries demonstrate where Indonesia enjoys an absolute advantage, producing more efficiently and in greater quantities than many other countries. However, to get a fuller picture, we also need to look at David Ricardo's theory of comparative advantage. Ricardo's framework is slightly different. It focuses not just on efficiency, but on opportunity cost. Even if a country cannot produce everything better than others, it can still gain by specializing in what it can produce at a lower cost relative to alternatives. In Indonesia's case, this applies strongly to labor intensive industries such as textiles, footwear, and furniture. With a large workforce and relatively low wages, Indonesia is well positioned to produce these goods more competitively than many developed economies. Research published in the American Economics Review by Amity and Congnist 2007 shows how Indonesia benefited from the trade liberalization, particularly in manufacturing, where access to cheaper imported inputs boosted productivity.
My name is Rohan, and in my section of the presentation, I will be focusing on Indonesia's trade policy instruments and explaining how the government currently uses them. I will be further linking these instruments to relevant theories of international trade. So, what are trade policy instruments? They are tools a government uses to boost the flow of goods and services in neighboring countries. These tools the government use consist of tariffs, quotas, subsidies, trade agreements, and non-tariff barriers such as licensing requirements. And in Indonesia, the government also uses a mixed approach by combining official systems with informal practices. This means that on one side, the government eases trade to attract foreign investment and combine into global value chains. But also, on the other hand, it also maintains a protectionist instrument to support domestic industries and promote economic self sufficiency. So, what are the most effective trade policy instruments in use by Indonesia today? The first point is tariff and import duties. Indonesia imposes tariffs on a variety of goods and services, specifically agriculture and manufacturing. An example of this is the tariffs on food products such as rice and sugar. These prices are kept high to protect the local farmers to help them out. The second point is trade agreements. Indonesia is also losing its restrictions through regional and bilateral agreements. It is also a founding member of ASEAN and also participates in the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, also known as RCEP. Indonesia has also signed a bilateral economic partnership agreement with Australia known as IACEPA. This reduces tariffs on goods and services traded between the two countries. An example of this could be Australia exporting beef and Indonesia exporting machinery. So it benefits both the countries equally. Third point is non-tariff measures. This includes licensing requirements, quotas, and even health and safety regulations. For example, the government requires special permits for importing goods such as beef and horticultural products. The fourth point and the last point is export restrictions. In the last few years, Indonesia has been increasingly using export bans and quotas to support domestic industries. An example of this would be the ban on exporting nickel ore so that the multinational companies would set up industries of their own and invest into the country. This benefits Indonesia heavily as this would also lead to an increase in employment and the GNI per capita. Therefore, as seen, Indonesia combines protective measures with selective liberalization. But how do these trade policy instruments relate to the theories of international trade? So, firstly, this leads to mercantilism. Indonesia's export restriction on a few raw materials shows a mercantilist mindset, where the government looks to benefit from this by gaining more multinational companies to set up their own industries in the country. They would also like to increase the employment rate and boost its trade surplus as well as the GNI per capita. The second point is the new trade theory. Indonesia's involvement in regional trade agreements such as RCEP and ASEAN can be explained through this, as they emphasize the role of economies of scale. Indonesia benefits from reducing tariffs in ASEAN as it allows them to gain access to larger markets and export more of their own goods to more countries. The third point is infant industry argument. Indonesia's high tariffs on agricultural products and manufactured goods can relate to the infant industry argument. The government basically protects these sectors until they become internationally competitive and can lead the market in those certain products. This approach also agrees with Friedrich List, who said that the developing countries should shield themselves in the early stages from foreign competition, which is a very smart idea. And the fourth and the last point is comparative advantage. The IACEPA agreement with Australia shows the comparative advantage theory. It is because Australia exports beef and education services, while Indonesia exports textiles, footwear, and machinery. Both countries benefit from this as both countries specialize in these certain products and are more efficient. Therefore, to conclude, Indonesia's mixed approach benefits them a lot, as in some instances they use quotas, tariffs, and export bans to protect industries, but at the same time, Indonesia has also a lot of trade agreements like ASEAN, IACEPA, and RCEP. This approach is one which is very smart by the government as they benefit from both approaches a lot and it also boosts the economy.
To conclude, globalization has reshaped Indonesia's political economy. Tariffs have fallen, foreign investment has increased, and the country is now more deeply integrated into global supply chains. At the same time, legal challenges such as licensing uncertainty and regulatory risk remain critical for Australian firms to understand. In terms of development, economic measures like GDP and GNI per capita reflect steady growth, but human development indicators such as education, healthcare, and workforce productivity are even more important when assessing Indonesia's long term potential. These directly influence labor quality and overall business efficiency. Cultural analysis shows a significant distance between Indonesia and Australia. While there is some convergence in urban, globally connected sectors, fundamental differences in hierarchy, collectivism, and communication style remain. For business, this means adaptation and cultural sensitivity are not optional, they are essential. Finally, trade theory highlights that while Indonesia's absolute advantages lie in natural resources, its comparative advantages in manufacturing, tourism, and emerging sectors like electric vehicle batteries present stronger opportunities for sustainable growth. Overall, Indonesia offers enormous opportunities, but success depends on recognizing legal risk, prioritizing human development, adapting to cultural differences, and pursuing industries where Indonesia holds a comparative edge. For Australian firms, the path forward is to build trust, commit for the long term, and approach Indonesia with both caution and optimism. Thank you.